I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Stephen Langdon. He's Professor Emeritus of Anthropology in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Alaska Anchorage. He has specialized in Southeast Alaska on topics related to pre-contact, historic, and contemporary fisheries of the Tlingit and Haida people. He has carried out numerous research projects throughout Alaska on a variety of public policy issues related to Alaska Natives, including Alaska Native subsistence, mixed subsistence, cash economies, traditional ecological knowledge, tribal self-determination, customary and traditional trade, limited entry, and other fishery-related issues. He's the author of The Native People of Alaska, a widely used introduction to Alaska Native people, as well as of many articles and reports. Please welcome Dr. Stephen Langdon.
Good old sheesh, ho ho, which is Tlingit for thank you very much. And I wish to acknowledge Kogagan Potawatomi, whose land on which we're able to meet. And I would like to express my gratitude to Darshan, the organizers, and my thanks to all the other presenters and those of you who are with us here in the audience today. The name that I was given by the Tlingit is quite indicative of ultimately their underlying existence-scape, the nature of their spirituality. My Tlingit name, which is also personified in terms of a necklace given to me with a raven on it, is At Uni Ish, which translates as the father of the tool or the implement. And this was the name of one of their ancestral wise individuals who passed back in 1939, who passed away. And in 1934, he had graciously given a very lengthy and complex account of the cultural traditions of his clan, the Ganahati, of which I'm, as a result of the name, a member of, to the anthropologist Ron Wilson. Those field notes taken by hand were in 1934. None of those materials had ever been returned to the community following Olson's leaving of the community. After many years of my working in the community, I recovered those notes from Berkeley, and I had them copied in large sheets, in the handwritten notes. And so I brought them back to my Ganahati clan members. And so it was at that time, when John Darrow's words returned, that I was given John Darrow's name. In the same notion, John Darrow was returned to them, and so I became John Darrow in that sense of being returned to them in that time. And this is the nature of the principle of cosmological cycling. That is the return. Things come and go. So today I want to convey which over a year of 40-year journey, I have been honored and fortunate enough to try to learn from many Tlingit elders, and I will speak and acknowledge about them momentarily. But I want to say just a little bit of something about what is the outline of my talk or the presentation, and it turns on two phrasings of sustainable wisdom, which is that on the one hand, one can view the concept of sustainable wisdom as that wisdom which has sustained indigenous people for thousands of years. And in the case of the Tlingit in their occupation of southeastern Alaska, at least 4,000 years and 5,000 years on a linguistic and archaeological basis. So that's what we have to see, is that long-term capacity that this particular form of wisdom has allowed the flourishing, and I very much like that word, the flourishing of these people, and their deep feeling and ties to their heritage, which we'll talk about as well. The second and reverse side, or the other side of the coin of sustainable wisdom, is thinking about the techniques and the pedagogy whereby that wisdom is sustained. How is it transmitted from one generation to the next? And this is a critical, important part of it. So there'll be two framings in terms of how I'm talking about this particular phenomenon. And I would now like to express my enormous gratitude and my humble thanks to my mentors and friends who for over 40 years have had the graciousness and the patience to have me with them, to be in experiences with them, to clarify for me, to show me, and in all ways to help me understand. My name was given to me by Alicia and Theodore Roberts here in the lower left, who were the ones of the Gunahuddy clan of the Raven moiety. Clara Paratovich, who you'll see later, is an enormously significant Tlingit who has passed away recently. I was honored to go up the Chilkat River, taken on a place-based journey. It's more than a journey, a sacred passage with the Chilkat Tlingit individual David Katzik. And you'll hear later from Joe Hodge on his relations with salmon and how those are meaningfully translated. And finally, my dear friend Dennis Demmert, when he was president of the Alaska Native Brotherhood, he honored me with a copper for the giving back of what I had acquired through various ways to the Tlingit community when I was the keynote speaker at the centennial of the formation of the Alaska Native Brotherhood in 2012. So each of these individuals, as well as many others, has been a part of what I've been able to learn and think and feel over my recent time periods. So just a bit of background about the Tlingit and Haida people. They occupy the region which is now known as southeastern Alaska, which is the coastal strip of the northeast Pacific coast up to the mountains, but they also have some interior populations as well. They were divided into 13 to 15 Kwan groupings, socio-territorial groupings. They lived in large cedar plank and spruce and hemlock houses along the shorelines. In those houses, some of those houses had their clan crests beautifully displayed. And I'll say a little bit more about what the meaning of art is in the context of these representations. What that particular representation is of a dog salmon. And it's the primary crest of the Raven clan, and you can see at the very top here, the raven as well. This face here represents the spirit of the salmon. And I'll say a little bit more as we go forward about the dog salmon people. And in their villages, particularly in the southern, but also in the north, are the famous kutia. And the kutia are sometimes called totem poles, and this, of course, some of these are mortuary poles. Now, I know Bruce says that he reads the New Yorker all the time. How many of you, there was an article in the New Yorker in which I was about John Barrymore stole a pole from this.
Yeah, I saw it, and
we
for it too.
Yes. John Barrymore stole a pole from this village, which I was able, in working through my particular channels of contact, we were able to find it in a museum in Hawaii and have it repatriated. So it is these particular activities that have engaged me over my lifetime. So the building blocks of Tlingit society are, first of all, matrilineal descent. So the primary descent line by which one becomes a member of the society. One's identity is formed is through one mother's side. The Kwans are the socio-territorial groups. They utilize what the French term moiety for the dual division. The raven and the eagle are the two sides, and under each side there are multiple clans. So this is why That's a raven dog salmon, and I'm raven gunahuddy. And these are the sovereign political entities, are the clans. These are the ones that stand in relationships. And within each community, as you saw, the houses are named, and they have a rank order in terms of their appearance, and a person's membership in their house continues after the house is in fact no longer present in space. Finally, there's the name, and as I spoke earlier, the names are part of the incredible heritage which is continuously cosmologically recycled through the concept of reincarnation. So in order to understand these concepts, the Tlingit have three really compelling critical concepts. The Shuka represents the joint heritage of the past, the present, and the future members of the clan. And the present generation must act as trustees to ensure the existence for themselves and others who return in the future. So there's a very forward-looking dimension to the Shuka notion. The Shagun notion is the notion of remembering and honoring those who have gone before. This is a critical part of the mortuary potlatch, is bringing forth those names of those persons who've gone before, and then at the end of that ceremony, bringing their spirit into this world by placing that name on those who have yet to receive names. And finally, a critical concept called At'u. And At'u references the sacred objects and practices which embody and memorialize ancestral experiences. Oftentimes, this is accomplished through the sacrifice of an individual. And these are what establishes the clan crests and the special relationships, the property or ownership relationships that they have with particular places. And you'll see how art is the medium for representing one aspect. These very sacred objects only appear on certain occasions and are brought out at the mortuary rituals. The Tlingit occupy an extraordinarily beautiful part of the world. The northwest coast is part of the rainforest environment, in which the very high quantities of rainforest produce the lush forests. They also produce enormous amounts of rainfall, which comes down in terms of rivulets, streams, creeks, and that, of course, is the home of got of salmon, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. What you're looking at here is a place where I've returned to in the community of Kawak. We're looking from the lagoon up to the estuary and above and beyond the estuary into the river proper. This entire intertidal zone, which I'm not going to talk about that today, is an entirely engineered landscape, a landscape that was created by Tlingit over thousands of years in the context of honoring and creating a system that sustains salmon. So, in looking and thinking about how one should go about contemplating the ways people get through their lives, I was never comfortable with worldview as a cultural anthropologist. Because I don't think, as was pointed out last time, it privileges sight as one of its notions. So I crafted another term, which I call an existence-scape. And in the existence-scape, the question is, what is it possible to think and do? So it goes beyond merely the idea of seeing, but it goes, and here I am in great support of the notions that Darsha and others are working with on the neurobiological foundations of what it is. And Forera spoke of it as well in various different ways, but we really want to emphasize what is it possible to think and do is what an existence-scape consists of. And so there are entities that surround us, some of which we are aware and some of which we are not, and they are constantly in flux in time and space, and these are through processes and interactions of reproduction and transformation. Through these processes and events, humans receive and create a stream of sensations. Those sensations are interpreted both physiologically and cognitively, and they are given linguistic labels when they rise to the level of consciousness. But understand very well, and I want to reinforce the notion that many of them do not rise there. Much of what we would call the culturally transferred relationships sit in our neurological synapses at an unrecognizable level. And some of these kinds of things, which I would point out later on, have to do with things like the way in which we orient our eyes, the ways in which we interact in spatial forms, the ways in which we interpersonally engage in terms of space. None of those things, which are culturally encoded through this continuous flow and stream of existence with our social collectivity, rise to the level of consciousness until they are pointed out to us. For example, with regard to eyesight, this is a lecture I used to give to my class, and I'll just divert just to give an example. The business of vision, the dominant American form of vision of American males is that they will look somebody straight in the eye for less than 3 seconds, and then they break off at a 45-degree angle. That is the cultural meaning of a natural encounter, an acceptable encounter. If you extend beyond that particular moment of 3 seconds into a longer gaze, a gaze of 4 seconds, of 5 seconds, the meaning changes dramatically from what you have just engaged in an initial contact to a very different kind of meaning. And what kind of additional meaning then comes about if you extend your gaze beyond 3 or 4 or 5 seconds? Anyone? What are the possibilities that gaze like that means?
Sex.
Sex.
Aggression.
Aggression, absolutely. So we all learn how to orient our eyes, and we do that. Now, men also cannot close their lashes and break off in the American dominant system. Only women can do that. When they're engaged, they can close their eyes and break off. If men do that, what then becomes the interpretive frame? This lady knows her her site. That's exactly right. And this actually happened in the course of
yeah, it could mean submission too.
Yeah, either of those things. These things, which are culturally encoded, have never probably risen. How many of you have never heard those things in your life? About. So now that for the first time now, until they raise to that level of consciousness, they are embedded within you until that particular moment. This is what I mean by the neurobiological, the neurologically foundations of these orientations, and it dovetails quite well with some of the things we've heard before. But I really want to stress that an existence-scape is grounded in the great French philosopher, come social scientist, Pierre Bourdieu, forwarded the word habitus, and I have taken in that concept of habitus to include all of these underlying kinds of orientations in terms of what goes on. So existence-scapes then comprise the realm of possible understandings, behaviors, and creative responses that are given a set of core cosmological and ontological principles. These are meanings that are passed down to us through mediated processes, some of which we learn and some of which are transmitted without that, and they represent the basis for creative engagements. So within the Tlingit existence-scape, as Dr. Cruikshank, with her work with Northern Tlingit many years ago, wrote, the Tlingit occupy a moral universe inhabited by a community of beings in constant communication and exchange. And this, of course, is what Boreros was talking about with regard to the tree, this constant interaction. But the moral point of it he was also discussing as well. So what we can examine then is the underlying principles of relational cosmology. That is, how in the Raven accounts do our present circumstances come to be. The relational ontology of what I call the mythic charter. And most indigenous nations, and certainly all the people of the salmon world, and this is one of the great, I would call the great conceptual foundations for long-term sustained existence, which I was asked about at Santa Fe Institute several years ago, in which there was a conference about these major conceptual frames by which people in different parts of the world have sustained themselves, and that is salmon as people. From the Columbia River that we learned about, all the way up until to the Tlingit and on beyond into some of the Athabascan people, salmon are people. That story is what sustained along that whole ride the continued productivity of what is at its base an extremely vulnerable species, a species that can be disrupted, but without the appropriate wisdom for these 4,000 years, those kinds of ontologies embedded in a mythic charter, which I'll talk about here shortly. Epistemology, the source of knowledge, is relational. It is relational through all of the beings around us. It is from interaction, and it calls forth attentiveness, constant attentiveness. And a relational phenomenology, which is that you must continue in your relations. You cannot withdraw. And ultimately, this leads to the philosophical proposition of relational sustainability, which I'll talk about. Specifically, I'll deal with the case of salmon because of its significance and iconicity in Tlingit society. So these key themes are the cosmology, where we can find the nature of existence, the entities. Cosmological cycling, which I've already made reference to, is the term that we use to talk about how existence is continuously returning, and it is inherent in human beings' behaviors that they conduct themselves appropriately for existence. This is also a part of a pan-northern existential philosophy. So you'll find it among the Yupik people in southwest Alaska. You'll find it amongst the Dene people as well, is this underlying cosmological cycling. The connections that exist between the domains of existence are there. The relations are absolutely foundational and unavoidable, and obligations that go on produce them. So what are some of Yale's transformations? Well, through these Raven accounts, which are one of the central ways in which young children are brought into Tlingit culture, we learn that Raven brought forth the sun, the moon, and the stars, that he obtained fresh water for all beings from a spring on an island, that he hauled in a tank from the ocean where all of the fish were housed and opened them up and made them available for all the species, that he tricked King Salmon into coming ashore, and he tricked the old woman into into creating the tides so that he could get down and get some resources. So we see in Raven a very different kind of being than the creator that comes out of Christianity. He's a trickster. He's a trickster who also represents, or we can see through these stories, that he has similar sorts of impulses. He is very, very gluttonous. He is very, very lusty. And he likes to express himself in these contexts. So what kind of lessons do we learn about Yale? From Yale, we learn that the movement between domains of existence occurs through his transformations. Animals and fish had to maintain in human presence their skins, whereas in the past they could take them off and communicate. That is not an uncommon account in many Native American cosmologies. The movement between forms of existence can occur. Things may not appear as they seem, and there are deeper meanings, and the implicit message are be observant, attentive, seek new knowledge and practices as things can change. Existence as presently experienced is contingent and potentially chaotic, which of course resonates quite well with the circumstances in which we find ourselves. So the Tlingit place names are one of the foundational ways in which probably the name Raven occurs in more of the Tlingit place names than any other basic component. So that Raven's actions are in place where they occur through this place naming process. The place naming process also ties people to their clan properties and to all kinds of other aspects. So the relational ontology then that is created through the mythic charter. It's the ontology that tells us how this existence is composed of willful, sentient, volitional spirits and forces, that respect and interdependence is crucial, and that the continuity of existence depends on relational principles of mutual benefits, respect and giving, and balance. It is not theistic. That's very critical. This is an order that has to be maintained through relationality. And it's not materialistic. It's not about conservation. It's not about biological reproduction. It's about sustaining the system that we know in terms of our relationships. So this mythic charter is the one when I did my traditional ecological knowledge interviews with elders about salmon. Anyone over 50, when I asked the question, what did you learn about salmon as a child? This mythic charter was always what was told to me. We learned about salmon through what is called the aquatoxine, or the salmon boy. And this is a mythic charter which establishes the foundational relationships between. And through that particular relationship, we find about the essential persons in all living forms, their interdependence and communicative activity, how they must be respected. This inherent dignity that is a part of a person is through respect, that there are critical ritual relations in which bones either are returned to the water or placed in the fire, and there must be a continuing balance for our existence to go forward. So in a model of cosmological cycling, what this basically means in this particular model is this is our lived existence in this particular world. When death occurs, the spirit, the person, passes into the other world from which they wait for their return. And their return, their rebirth, is dependent upon all of human activities in various domains. So in the human domain, we have to conduct the kuwait, the potlatch, which releases the spirit. The body has to be cremated. All of these are necessary forms for the cosmological cycling to be undertaken. And only upon the conclusion of those ritually significant events can this return be accomplished. All of those are part of the Salmon Boy story. And these are, through the kuwait, the dreams and the visions tell us who's coming back, and these critical actions. This is one of the fascinating things, another dimension about how we see this in practice, is that Tlingit and Haida people who have a similar belief, if someone drowns, what are the implications of drowning? The implication of drowning is that you must get that body. The body has to be returned. Because if the body isn't returned, it can't be what? It can't be created. The spirit can't be released. So you find this enormous, incredible intention at the point of a drowning to accomplishing those kinds of activities. So these are the four core principles: cosmological cycling, the essential spirit, the respect, and ritual relations, including the return of the salmon. But this is accomplished by which a young boy who violates, who morally transgresses, and this is an important part with regard to how this is situated in people. A young boy is given a piece of dried salmon by his mother, and he throws it down in disgust. The absolute abomination of sin. And his mother reprimands him, and he runs out down to the shore to check some of his fishing gear. And he falls into the water, and he would have drowned except that the salmon people and the leader of the salmon people see them. So they come up and they take him. They take him down to the world of the salmon people offshore. The recurrent story that's there everywhere, where he then learns. The salmon people take off. He sees they're like ourselves, and this is a crucial point which was made before. He learns from the salmon how to behave. He is taught, and it's this constant orientation of being taught to listen that is in this mythic charter. So then on their way back, the salmon leader says, we're going back to the stream. And they all get into the canoe, and they head back out toward the stream. But as a salmon, when the leader tells him to stand up and see where we are, the salmon jumps out of the water. And when he jumps out of the water to see where they are, then he can see that he is to go back to his home stream where he can see his parents. His parents, he was wearing a copper necklace at the time in which he went to drown. So he goes up and he presents himself to his parents. His father gaffs him, turns him over to his mother, who begins the processing. She opens the gills and the standard cut, and she finds the copper necklace. She says, "Whoa, what do we have here?" So she calls upon the Ix, the shaman, to come and tell her what is the situation. And he says, "Put the salmon up above, and overnight we will find out." And overnight the transformation occurs. And he returns and he teaches them all what he was learned from the salmon, and he becomes a powerful shaman in his own right. These are the mythic charter that is handed down, that is returned to. Another part of Tlingit pedagogy, and why all of these elders could tell me this story, is that they are enjoined to sustain that story within themselves and return to it. So all of these things are a part of it: sentience, attentive, volitional, dignity, and power. Some of them establish greater information. This particular chart shows where the salmon came, and so it can tell people where they're at. Now, how do you go about the process of respect? Joe Hodge, who you saw earlier, says, when they're jumping, we are supposed to say, "I ho." You see a fish jump, "I ho." Then they know they're being appreciated, so they keep jumping. Affirmation and recognition, that call to them. I was on fishing boats when my journey with Tlingits began back in 1973, and I would hear that cry. And in 1973, I had no idea. It's only in the generation and a half later, 30 years later, that I'm able to say, "Oh, those guys are saying ayo." I said, "Oh, that's their way of saying there's a fish jump, go get the fish." But it's this affirmation, the first affirmation and recognition. That's the first part of respect. And so when salmon people are arriving, and this is, I was once on this place when this happened with my elder, Theodore Roberts. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? And seeing this joyful return of all of these salmon as they're celebrating their return to their home. And there's Theodore Roberts, who when they started jumping, gave the I-ho to them. And then when he saw, if you would go back and look before, you will see these kinds of groupings of salmon circling around, and he would say, "Those are the families. Those are the families that are going to certain places to be together and to spawn." And so here they are now entering their home, their stream, and that represents then this first phase of this respectful engagement that is done with the salmon. And so then after that, there's a singing and dancing at the stream. The people would come together and they would wear their regalia. They would wear their regalia, and this regalia is a part of the representation. Here we see the salmon being represented. And this gets to the principle of art. Art as gift. I want to emphasize the notion of that artistic representation is a form of gift. Because what? We as human beings in our persons understand aesthetic value. If you want to call it art, it's beauty. Whatever it is, the aesthetic qualities are clearly measured and understood by ourselves. And when we are in human encounters and others present us with beauty, we recognize and receive that as a gift. So too, our salmon brethren, when we present these beautiful manifestations, we are gifting to them. And we're gifting to them through our dance as well, but also we're going to invite them into our forts or our traps. And this is what they refer to the fish traps as, the weirs, as their forts. And on the forts are these little objects you can see here. And these objects are carved objects as well. And the most astonishing object that I ever saw and have seen is this one. And this is what was actually a carved stake that was positioned on a weir like this outside the village of Langdon. And what does it represent? What is represented in that carving? Anyone?
Fish boy.
It's the salmon boy. It's absolutely what's represented. We see the salmon and we see the boy inside of it. But this is not a mnemonic device to tell the salmon. We know the story. It's not put up in our lodges. It's not brought forth in terms of our dancing. It's for whom to see. Who sees that object? And when do the salmon see it? When they're jumping out of the water. This is how the mythic charter informs. Over and over and over again, it is returned to with regard to behaviors. It's an open system in which we as creative human beings can continuously generate appropriate responses that resonate in the context of that system. So this is, and in Kawak, the final action of ritual return is following this feast, the first Salmon Feast. The bones are collected. They're placed in the water to return so that they can return offshore. And as the bones go down, the clan leader sings to them and wishes them safe passage. So on and on, through all of these things, there are more behaviors that are transmitted. Handle with care. When they're killed, such that their spirit can travel to the spawning grounds. Take only what is needed. Many of these are so consonant with other Native American principles. Share with others. I'll turn very quickly to talk about this other phenomenon, the phenomena of Ish. Ish is another thing that has not appeared in the context of the understandings of Tlingit until I took people to places. And in places, they would talk about what an Ish is. An Ish is a deep pool in a stream. And the significance of a deep pool in a salmon spawning stream is that Tlingit are aware of the long distance they're coming back. They see the rivulets and the fast water where salmon go through quickly. They see their energetic surges to get up the falls. But in the pools, they languidly circle around, and that's where they regenerate themselves. That's where they are in a contemplative philosophical moment. Because they know in that position that their next stage is going to be what? They're going to spawn and they're going to die. So the Ish is a sacred place. It is a sacred place because we can see how important it is to the salmon on these multiple dimensions. And so it's a distinct concept. It reappears in the discussions, even in English. They'll talk about the Ish. And in this discussion, it is indeed all of these things that I've talked about. It's a harvesting location. Here's a young man, but more importantly, utilizing it with his gaff to get salmon. But it is a site of modification. And here I want to talk about how, within the Ish concept, Tlinkit's streamscaped. If you look at this, what they did is create this falls. Look at that fall, how natural and linear it does. It was created by moving rocks from above it to do what? To create an Ish. So the Tlinkits have engaged in Landes capital formation. I'm not going to talk, that's an archaeological discussion. But these things are a part of then the incorporation of the understanding of Ish into larger behavioral epistemes as well. So the Ish reappears here again in some of the poles. One of my most favorite images is as this house front, and it's in the circle. And here again we see the Ish as this circle, the sacred circle where salmon return to over and over again. I'm not going to talk about the reasoning, but I want to return here to talk a little bit about how significant this is as a philosophical moment. One of the great recognized American philosophers, or Western philosophers, Alfred North Whitehead, wrote, "The true method of philosophical construction is to frame a scheme of ideas the best that one can and unflinchingly explore the interpretation of experience in terms of that scheme." And this is precisely what James Samuel Osborne said when he said, "You have to understand that we treat salmon like we would like to be treated as persons in that way." Now, does this always work? No. Tlinkits have a concept of plakas, violation, and that's very important to understand. Indeed, in the mythic charter, it is violation that sets in motion what? The moral transgression creates the teachable moment. This is very important in Tlingit pedagogy and how they go forward. The boy nearly drowns. There are other stories. Castine is a legend of a girl in seclusion. A girl in seclusion when she's in training and learning. But she violates her taboos, her tlakas. And as a result, the glacier comes down and consumes her village. Or another young girl similarly invites the octopus and devours their village. So these constitute violations and a failure to attend to God. So these are very important to understand how violations set up. Then on the other side, how do we go about sustaining? Where does the social reproduction come from? Sustainable wisdom then is a structuring of those experiences to develop that deep basis of neurological engagement. The immersion and the constant exposure, the redundant occasions of multiple movements, participation, being included in activities, responsibility, your needs to accomplish, and accomplishment, praise for contribution to activities. And I'm reminded in the Pokagon dance, even the ones who could barely walk, and in events that I've been at, even the children are always included. They don't stand aside. Clara that you saw, she was praised, carried the salmon to the fire pit for the first salmon ceremony when she was 4 years old. Theodore, who we saw with the salmon as a 7-year-old, was charged to throw rocks to make sure that the fish would stay in the fish trap. So all of this is a part of the pedagogy. So these are the pedagogies that through which these things occur. Storytelling, continuous dramatic contexts, dynamic characterizations in body language. Young people are central characters in all of those stories. And this is, I brought forward, and I could talk about some of my recent work on that. Special occasions, the female puberty seclusion is so important. The training and the challenging of nephews. And I'm just going to start this particular video, and then I'm going to stop. Is another example of Tlingit pedagogy, and that Chandar references the island on which this occurs.
I was about 4 years old when my mother took me to this location. Actually didn't put me right to the point. She just let me find it myself rather than having to take me right to it, because it really brought my attention to the petroglyph. And I was so excited, I called my mother and said, "Look at this rock, how come it's different?" Talking in Tlingit. And my mother says,
So what we see here is one of the most powerful of the Tlingit forms of pedagogy, structured discovery. Structured discovery which leads to, you can hear in her voice, 70 years later, the excitement, the awe, and the wonder. And these are part of the powerful, the wisdom of sustainability in the pedagogy of the people, in embedding the neuronal foundation of orientation and of relationship that can be carried throughout your life and can then be transmitted. So thank you very much. I'm going to end on that.
Wow, Steve, thank you so much.
Can you use a microphone, please? Stand up or behind you.
Yeah, I feel really blessed to receive so much bountiful wisdom in such a short space of time and let it flow over me. Thank you. Ish. One thing I'm wondering is if just a bit south of southern Alaska, so many of the rivers, the names end with ish, Snohomish.
I've wondered about that, but I haven't found But you see, Salish ends in ish.
Yes.
So
yes.
I don't know
No.
that phoneme is translatable. I have not found that. I have yet to find a similar conceptualization amongst the Tsimshian.
I see. Okay. Well, so my thought question is very moved by the sense, which I've encountered among other peoples as well, of art or creation of beauty, not so much for ourselves, but for the others. So the sense of the landscape as being utterly sentient, and one creates beauty to be pleasing to the spirits, to the powers, to the mountains, to the forest, to the other animals. From everything you've just shared, it does seem like the human intelligence and wisdom is something we carry in relation to this other being, this other creature, Salmon, who teaches us this and holds us in a right relation to the world and to one another by being in contact with Salmon. And I was just wondering if you could say anything. I mean, the sense seems that perhaps we're human only in contact and conviviality with what is not human, and as more and more species are disappearing, are going extinct, are being shoved into extinction, we then are losing more and more of our capacity to be human and to know what it is to be.
Well, that's a very interesting concept, and certainly the premise ultimately, and I never use the term steward. Steward is a hierarchical term. Okay, you might use the term trustee, but you're a trustee in the sense that you have to engage in the ritual obligations. So they express strong concerns. They are, as everywhere, just as the Sioux up there are about water. The Tlingits are about, and the Yupiks are about water as well with regard to mining and how that endangers their salmon systems in Bristol Bay. So that constant looking forward as trustees, whether it's 7 generations or relational sustainability, one way or the other, requires. It is part of that obligation to make it possible for this existence to be sustained. That is one of the things. So species are one thing, environmental contexts and all of those, it is a Tlingit who are out there. But understand that they have engaged in Lacoste violations on their own. Large clear cutting, that they've had to face enormous internal conflict over that particular dimension.
Could the Tlingit continue to be Tlingit without salmon, if salmon no longer existed?
I won't speak for them. They will make that decision. Some would say no, because they're out there to receive them. But there are Tlingit that live in San Francisco, and other Tlingit that live elsewhere, so I can't respond to that per se. All of those people over 50, then the charter was absolutely essential.
One more question.
Okay, thank you. When you were speaking or using your phrase existence-scapes, epigenetics came to mind on that phrase.
Yes, exactly. Sure.
But also, from what I gleaned with regards to Ish, you're describing it as a natural occurring or man-made pool, such that as the salmon come upstream, they have this opportunity to contemplate their forward motion and or commune amongst themselves, as I understood you describing this. This then, Ish, is a sacred area.
They have names.
Okay. Did I understand you to say that that is also a fishing opportunity?
Yeah, you saw the man with his
Okay,
gap.
so how I'm finding it somewhat difficult to take what you're describing as a sacred area, such that the salmon can commune, contemplate, but yet present, as the Tlingit use it, as a fishing opportunity. I just see that those two sort of are not in sync. I understand the practicality of it. I'd say, are they intruding into this sacred area where, as I thought you were describing it, as a contemplative or communing among themselves?
It's multi-dimensional, all of those things at once. They can't be divorced from each other. So they occur all at the same time. And the act of creating issues clearly means a recognition of, and I didn't talk about some of the cognitive things that are going on. How I talk about it cognitively is abductive reflexivity. And I'll try to briefly, abduction is quite different. This is a Charles Peirce term to distinguish one from induction and deduction. Abduction is the building of a hypothesis of relationship and then the examination of additional evidence to see if your initial hypothesis is there. So the abduction is from ourselves. And we learn then back and forth. Sometimes we learn that other species do something else. But it's the reflexivity is the continuous movement back and forth. And so when they do take a salmon from that location, as you see them do, there is thanks. And as I mentioned, they have to be killed so that the spirit can go upstream. So all of those things have to be done in order to make it a sacred circumstance. But all of those aspects are part of the multidimensionality. Those things are not, they don't violate one or the other. We do all of these things in this place. And we put it in our art to show that we know and we care about it.
It's a fulfillment of a social contract between the Tlingit and the Salmon people.
Yes, absolutely. That's one way of terming it, yes. That the relational sustainability is contingent upon us to behave in such a way, and they give themselves to us because they know, in the Salmon Boy story, that they can do the same thing as we will.
Yes.
They can return just like we return. That's the way in which the Yupiks see their relationship with the seals. This is a northern cosmological philosophical system.
Thank you for your brilliant work.